Hello and welcome to the Coriolis Technologies Trade Talks with me, the Chief Executive of Coriolis Technologies, and Jack Harding, who is our Head of Political Risk. Jack, a huge amount has happened over the last couple of weeks since we last spoke, and obviously President Biden has spent the last 48 hours reconnecting with the American people. But there are some huge areas that he has to deal with now, particularly the Middle East and Russia. So what are likely to be his detailed foreign policy big actions in the first 100 days in office?
Well, I mean, you're correct in stating that, he's been focusing on the American people, and also with this idea of reconnecting with the US's traditional allies. Things like he's signed a record number of executive orders. I think it was something like 15 in his first 24 hours in office, relating to COVID and the WHO, and reinstating or trying to reinstate the US into the Paris Climate Accord as well. But the Biden administration is still absolutely aware of the pressing issues that the United States is facing in terms of its foreign policy. So this, particularly, as far as I'm concerned, relates to the issues of Russia, Iran, and also some other issues that Biden's pick for Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, actually raised, which was China and also Turkey. So he stated that Russia is actually very high on the agenda for the Biden administration, which is unsurprising, really. But he also stated that Iran, the US had an urgent responsibility to prevent Iran from actually acquiring nuclear weapons. He referred to China as the most significant challenge of any nation state to the United States. And he also referred to Turkey's purchase of these missile defense systems, Russian S-400 missile defense systems, as entirely unacceptable. So I think what you have there is you have four clear policy areas that we might be seeing in the next, well, to use your time frame, the next 100 days, particularly Russia, Iran, Turkey, and China. So Russia, I've talked about this before, but the immediate priority is going to be this New START issue, which is the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And it's such an important issue. It stands for the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and it limits the US and Russia to the deployment of 1,550 nuclear warheads. And it also places restrictions on the number of ICBMs, that's intercontinental ballistic missiles, and SLBMs, which is submarine launched ballistic missiles, and also heavy bombers. So essentially, it's limiting the nuclear capabilities of both Russia and the United States. The issue is that it expires on the 5th of February. So we have 2 weeks, essentially, until the final safety net that's actually restricting US and Russian arms buildups actually expires. And if this lapses, then we have a potential nuclear arms race on our hands. I mean, this sounds incredibly pessimistic, but there is cause for optimism, particularly Blinken has actually stated that the US is going to seek to extend it. And in the past, the Kremlin had also indicated that it would be up for its extension as well. And there was actually some additional clauses that were added in by the Trump administration, such as trying to bring China into the New START treaty, that actually caused it to fall through. So I would say in the next couple of weeks, definitely expect to see this in the news. There's some sort of rumblings in DC that the process has already started. The counter is in Russia that the Russians actually very much see the onus as being on the United States to get things moving again. But that's something definitely that we should expect to see in the next couple of weeks. With Iran, of course, the most pressing issue being the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and this is commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal. Some sources, again, have stated that the Biden administration is already holding talks with Iran on this issue, and Biden definitely wants to reinstate this deal. The tricky thing is going to be the balancing act with Iran, the United States, and also other partners in the Middle East, particularly Israel. So there was one Israeli government official who actually was quoted as saying, if Biden adopts Obama's plan, of course, in 2015, this was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, said we will have nothing to talk we will have nothing to talk about with him. So essentially, if Biden copy pastes the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was devised under the Obama administration, it's likely that it will fall flat in terms of Israel being receptive to it. So it's the challenge for Biden really is going to be ensuring that this balancing act between all of their partners is actually achieved. And that's going to be the challenge. And then on Turkey, I suppose I just wanted to add this note. Since July 2017, Russia's actually been delivering components to Turkey for the S-400 missile defense systems. So Coriolis, in fact, has actually picked up an 80% increase in Turkey's imports of chassis for components for missiles, guidance systems, solid rocket booster, which is used for missile stabilization, that actually match this time frame. So the data bears out the sort of the quotes in the media that we're seeing on Coriolis' database. Now, why this is important is because Turkey is a member of NATO, and their purchase of these systems is actually a really serious threat to NATO's collective defense. So NATO is developing these fifth generation fighters, the F-35s, and they'll be operating around the Mediterranean on exercises and also on operations. So if Turkey actually possesses these missile defense systems, it hands a strategic advantage to Russia because it allows them to actually gauge how effective their systems are against the stealth capabilities of the F-35. So this is an incredibly important thing that needs addressing. And it was hardly addressed under the Trump administration, which has allowed Turkey to actually sort of get away with it. But Biden is definitely going to be looking at this because his Secretary of State, Blinken, has suggested that he will be. So essentially, NATO's ability to actually maintain a credible deterrent posture depends on the unity of NATO. So this is something that needs addressing, but under Biden's administration, I think we're likely to see a reaffirmation of the United States' commitment to NATO. So again, although it all seems doom and gloom, there is some cause for optimism.
Thank you. So, I mean, we're looking at a major legacy of the Trump era being this kind of shake-up, pivot towards Russia. I mean, obviously, we've seen a big shift in populism as well, and the other populist country that has had a populist regime, if you like, has been the United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom has actually downgraded the EU ambassadorial status in London. Now, that seems like a deliberate strategy to kind of antagonise relationships with the EU. Why have they done this, and what's the longer term signal it's sending out, do you think?
Yeah, well, as you said, I mean, the situation essentially is that the United Kingdom has decided not to grant the EU ambassador, which is João Vale de Almeida, the same diplomatic privileges as diplomats from other nation states. The UK's thinking is that the EU isn't a nation state. It's an international organization, so therefore it should be sort of relegated down the diplomatic rankings. And by the way, Donald Trump tried to do the same thing in 2019. So he also referred to the EU as a foe. So those two things kind of go hand in hand as far as I see it. I mean, the move is likely to conjure up within the European Union these memories of Donald Trump doing the same thing and also the rhetoric that he used. And I think to your question on the sort of signal that it's sending out, you're correct in saying it seems to be slightly antagonistic, almost kind of Britain first agenda to match the sort of the US's America first at the time. So the interesting thing, though, is just a couple of days ago, Boris Johnson actually chaired a meeting with 30 business leaders. And according to an article on the BBC, the core message that actually emerged from this meeting was that the UK is not going to deliberately antagonize the EU straight after Brexit. But this seems to be that. And I think it's an important issue because it's essentially defining the nature of the relationship that the United Kingdom wants to have with the EU. And I mentioned this idea of perhaps Britain first, and you mentioned yourself this populist idea. it all seems to me perhaps a little astrategic, because the UK, although it's exited the EU, has not exited Europe. We're still Europeans. And the defence and the security of the United Kingdom is inextricably linked to the defence and the security of the European Union and Europe as a whole. And also in trade terms, in terms of supply chains, we're still going to be very dependent on the European Union for our prosperity, which, by the way, is one of the key aspects of the United Kingdom's national security strategy: prosperity for the United Kingdom and to protect our people. So their interests are still linked with the European Union, and this just seems to be almost a sort of attempt at needling the European Union. And there's an interesting quote by Machiavelli. He said that people should either be caressed or crushed, and this seems to be neither. It's just in this middle ground that just seems perhaps to be. It doesn't seem to be serving any kind of long-term strategic purpose other than to irritate the European Union, and I see that as being perhaps slightly problematic with my sort of security hat on in terms of the UK's security relationship with the European Union.
So just on that security and relationship, and just finally, are we going to be more or less secure now we're outside of the European Union? I mean, it's a huge issue and we've barely talked about it. So just finally, what are your thoughts on our security position and what the big challenges are going to be?
Yeah, well, I mean, Priti Patel's position is that the UK is going to be more secure post-Brexit. I may be slightly more cautious and argue that exiting the European Union may affect our security. So with that qualifier, it also may not. The trouble also being this idea of causation. Any potential security incident that we experience in the future, it's going to be hard to unequivocally state that this was due to Brexit. So we have to be a little bit cautious. I don't think we can say one way or the other whether it's definitely going to affect our security. What I would say is it's definitely going to make certain aspects of our security more challenging and more time consuming. So on the policing and intelligence front, for example, the UK has lost its membership of Europol, Eurojust, and also the European arrest warrant. And we're no longer going to have access to real-time data through different systems like the Schengen Information System 2. So you might see that written as SIS2. And yeah, so the process really is going to be a little bit more long-winded. And this is particularly risky in an area when time really is of the essence, in particularly policing and intelligence. But again, to be slightly more optimistic, the UK has its own world-class policing and intelligence capabilities. And we haven't necessarily been overly reliant on the intelligence of our partners in the past. We can rely on the security services in the United Kingdom and their ability to sort of keep the country safe. So I wouldn't say Brexit inherently undermines our security in that space, but it does make it slightly more tricky. Through the sort of relationships that we now need to sort of build with the European Union. I would also say on the defence and military aspect, that's still going to be achieved through NATO. And Britain is a key member of NATO due to its active foreign policy, capable military, and also its nuclear deterrent. So the UK really is, for the West in broad terms, is still a key partner in terms of Western security and defence. But the trouble is actually with the European Union, a lot of these things like negotiations with Russia actually fell outside of the NATO framework, and actually negotiations with Russia took place within the European Union framework. Yeah, you mentioned the defence review as well. So this obviously was supposed to have been published in 2020. And obviously, due to COVID, it's been delayed, but we're expecting it imminently. And it's being called the integrated review. So essentially, this is a really important point, actually, when it comes to Britain's future strategy, because it's about integration of all of the levers of Whitehall, all of the organs of state, civil and military. And I think what this post-Brexit era means for the United Kingdom is a transition from security, a clear delineation between the lines of security being intelligence in one space and military in another, and civil forces in another. Instead, everything's coming together as one. And I think in that sense, if it can be achieved, and if there's an effective mechanism that's devised for actually smoothly integrating all of these levers of Whitehall, then we actually have a lot of cause for optimism for the security of the United Kingdom in the future. So I would say that Brexit, while it does pose some challenges, has also afforded several opportunities for the United Kingdom to actually carve out a new and more agile strategy for defence and security in the future.
Thank you very much. Really interesting and lots of challenges ahead. Thank you very much indeed, Jack.
You're welcome.